There hasn't been a successful populist party in Finland until very recently. Some have even spoken of Finnish exceptionalism when it comes to the rise of the right in Scandinavia. In the 90s, Denmark, Norway, Sweden all had their radical right parties. Both Denmark and Norway had the Progress parties, formed in opposition to what they saw as obsessive taxation. These parties are and were neoliberal offerings, and eventually came to morph into anti-immigration nativist parties. Sweden had New Democracy that were of a similar strain, but Finland had no equivalent until the dramatic surge of the Party of Finns in 2011, seemingly from out of nowhere. Now the Party of Finns is in coalition government and the second biggest party in the country. The party has boomed from obscurity to government in less than a decade. The question then is why, and moreover, what do they stand for? Finland is a thoroughly agrarian country compared to the rest of Scandinavia. The most densely forested country in Europe, much of the country's identity has been fermented around agriculture and an idealized lifestyle of rural simplicity. This has historically created a rigid rural-urban divide, manifesting itself in strong political cleavages. The Civil War of 1918, following Finnish independence from Russia post-October Revolution, between the White Army and Communist forces sedimented this divide. The Communists, the losers of the war, came to be associated with the urban centres, whereas the White Army identified with the traditional and rural peasant communities, and were able to implement this national imaginary after their victory. For a brief moment after the war, there was an attempt to sediment alliances between Finland and Germany with efforts to impose a monarchy of German origin. This fell through with the collapse of the Central Powers. This move was resisted wholeheartedly by the Agrarian League, a party seeking to represent the rural community to the north of the country, founded in 1906. The party became a staple of Finnish politics, earning 19% of the vote in 1919. The party eventually came to have issues. Their position was centrist, and often they sought conciliatory policies aimed at unifying the urban and rural centres of the country. In this spirit, the party became the Centre Party in 1965. Prior to then, discontent began to simmer amongst the party's more traditional constituents. Veikko Vennamo, a fiery politician highly critical of the new direction of the Centre Party, formed his own group in opposition, the Finnish Rural Party. Veikko Vennamo's new outfit can be considered populist in some ways. He came to be highly critical of corruption, which led to considerable success in the 1970s in the wake of the 1979 Salora scandal, in which the head of the Finnish tax administration was convicted of taking bribes from Finnish electronic manufacturer Salora. Vennamo was a lawyer by trade, and thus was in a perfect position to criticize who he saw as a corrupt elite taking advantage of the common man, and often referred to the establishment as rotten gentlemen. The party increased its parliamentary seats from 2 to 7 in the 1983 election. However, it would be wrong to conflate the Finnish Rural Party with the radical right-wing populism sweeping through Europe now. As the name would suggest, the party was fundamentally agrarian in nature and not concerned with ethno-nationalism, nor civic nationalism for that matter, but they did plant the seeds for what was to come. The party's support declined towards the mid-1990s, and they eventually went bankrupt in 1995. Finland went through dramatic upheaval upon the collapse of the Soviet Union. 65% of the country's eastern trade was with the USSR, and such a dramatic loss of industry hit the country hard, plunging it into nationwide depression. Unemployment of the working population increased to 20%, all the while cuts to the welfare state were being implemented. There increasingly seemed to be no viable alternative for the Finnish electorate. Finnish politics has traditionally been a rule-by-consensus affair, with the biggest four traditional parties amassing about 80% of the vote. This often means they all go into coalition government together. In 1995, for example, the government consisted of 5 parties: the Social Democrats, the right-wing National Coalition, the Swedish People's Party, the Left Alliance, and the Green League. This strongly selects against opposition and favours a permissive and conciliatory style of politics. As politicians are reluctant to oppose fellow politicians they may find themselves in government with at a later date. This consensual approach to government increases the perception that politics is largely fruitless, as this disaffection rose. To increase this sense of alienation, in 1994 Finland held its referendum on EU membership. Although the referendum was successful at 57% approval, it did serve to alienate a significant proportion of the population. The decision to hold the referendum at the time was also politically motivated. Sweden was less favourable to EU membership than Finland, and would likely have voted no had they voted prior to their Finnish neighbours, as opinion polls of the time indicated. Instead, though, Finland voted for entry and Sweden replicated this subsequently. To make the situation even more polarising, the population were lied to regarding the common currency. A separate referendum, they were told, would be held on entry into the Eurozone. However, this never happened, and the country adopted the Euro regardless in 1999. The Party of Finns was formed amidst this climate from the ruins of the Finnish Rural Party. A key founding member was Timo Soini, former party secretary. An odd character, Soini is a proud supporter of British football club Millwall, a devout Catholic, highly unusual in the Lutheran country of Finland, and fittingly wrote his master's thesis on Finnish populism at the University of Helsinki. Soini came to front the party and eventually brought it to success in 2015. He is the current Deputy Prime Minister of the country. The party's platform has changed over the years. Originally, the party was more or less the same as its predecessor, an economically left-leaning party seeking to protect the sick, elderly, small business owners and agriculturalists, with a splatter of discontent related to the government's foreign policies. In their first election in 1999, the party failed to receive just 1% of the vote. But by 2011, they were raking in almost 20%. What happened? Well, as mentioned before, Finnish politics has been a consensual affair, and thus all parties are seen to be more or less representing the same ideals. The Greens and the Left Alliance were supposed to be, in theory, Eurosceptic or at least Euro-critical, yet they were in coalition about the time of EU accession and monetary union, despite no vote on the latter. One of the biggest predictors of a populist party's expansion is the increasing perception of all parties being in it together and indistinguishable. This is exactly what had happened in Finland. As the noughties marched on, the party became increasingly critical of the EU, filling a political space hitherto unfilled and providing an avenue for the almost 50% of the country that had voted against membership. By 2007, the party's manifesto was comparing the EU to the Soviet Union, and although not in favour of a flat-out departure, they did seek the ending of monetary union and increased independence. In 2009, they were one of the founding parties of Nigel Farage's Europe for Freedom and Democracy in the EU Parliament, sedimenting their image as Eurosceptic and defining themselves through their alliances. This shift in attitude came at a perfect time. Not only could the Party of Finns disassociate themselves from the establishment on ideological terms, but also on moral ones. Come 2008, the party was beset by a political scandal involving key centre-party politicians not disclosing the source of campaign funds that rapidly decreased public trust in the party and encouraged a switch of many supporters to the Finns party. As far back as 2003, the Finns party were already dubbing themselves the only true alternative. Their 2003 manifesto stated, "To challenge the power of the old parties and the monopoly of opinion is the main task of our party." In terms of socio-cultural issues like immigration, the party is a bit ambiguous. This hasn't stopped the media from dubbing the party far-right, although this is far too simplistic. The Huffington Post in 2014 put the party as number 4 on its list of scariest far-right parties now in the European Parliament, which certainly raises eyebrows and generates a few hits for their website, but the party's stance on immigration is fractured. Immigration prior to the rise of the Finns party hasn't been a big issue in Finland. The country receives very low levels of immigration, with only 5% of residents being foreign-born. However, the party does have a strong nationalist wing, informally led by Jussi Halla-aho, who first ran for the party in 2008 and became a member in 2010. Halla-aho runs the blog Scripter, which in 2008 was considered the most read online blog in the country and focuses on issues of tolerance, immigration and multiculturalism. He's run into some controversy in his time with the party and was convicted of hate speech for a blog post in 2008 in which he compared Islam to paedophilia. This rise to prominence of such figures reformulated the debate in the country, and other parties started to mobilise on these issues in attempts at co-option. The Social Democrats launched a campaign entitled "When in Rome, Do as the Romans Do", in an attempt to salvage the vote share lost to the Finns party. Timo Soini remained quiet and never implemented party discipline on halla-aho for this faux pas, which many have interpreted as an implicit nod of acceptance. By 2011, such missteps increased exponentially. The true Finns shocked the world in 2011 when they managed to secure almost 20% of the vote, but this had its costs to party image. As a relatively new political force, the party lacked quality people to fill its seats. This led to a mass of unqualified and underexperienced politicians taking office. Prior to 2011, the party's English name was True Finns. True here signified the normal, everyday Finn, hitherto unrepresented politically. The True was dropped for fear it would evoke ideas of ethno-nationalist and essentialist ideas of Finnishness. Regardless, putting normal people into office helped the party live up to its reputation, but also resulted in some embarrassing political blunders. One MP publicly used the Finnish equivalent of the term nigger and said in a discussion with high school children that children raised by homosexual parents would turn out, quote, double gay. These accusations were brushed off by the MP in question by stating that he was from the countryside and thus was just talking how true rural Finns speak. No discipline was levelled against this MP, but Soini did urge him to exercise more caution in public. In 2013, one party MP, James Hirvisaari, was expelled for inviting an open National Socialist into the parliamentary chamber, who was also photoed taking a Nazi salute in the Finnish parliament. This was one step too far for Soini. Despite these elements within the party, even the Finnish establishment refuses to sideline the Finns party on account of its more radical elements. Indeed, there is a mainstream acceptance of the party, something very different from the treatment the Sweden Democrats receive in Finland's neighbouring country. No party has ruled out working with the Finns, although in 2011, incumbent Prime Minister Mari Kiviniemi said coalition would not be viable unless the party toned down its EU criticism. In 2015, former Prime Minister Alexander Stubb told the Financial Times that the media was wrong to lump the Finns party with far-right parties throughout Europe, and praised Soini for his pragmatism. He concluded his remarks stating, "I think Europe should give the guy a chance. This and the party's origins in agrarian populism has given the party legitimacy, making them a viable voting alternative." The 2011 elections did not result in the party entering government. As already stated, the then Prime Minister stated explicitly that the party would have to tone down its anti-EU rhetoric for the prospect of coalition. Soini refused to, and instead the centre-left Social Democrats and the centre-right National Coalition formed a six-party coalition government, which neutralised any ambitions the party had of affecting policy. Soini abjectly rejected the possibility of coalition, knowing by doing so the party would necessarily have to compromise certain key positions, mostly economic-related, as he himself remarked. "Many among us believe that we should have joined government. We concluded that the crisis will continue for several years. If we join government and change our view of the EU, we will fall on that." Regardless of what Soini said, ironically the period following the 2011 election can best be characterised as one of moderation. By 2014, the party's manifesto was aiming for EU reform rather than monetary exit, and even praised former Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron for his reformist attitudes. This can be seen as Soini setting his sights on political power, but also a changing political climate in Finland. The Crimean crisis served to remind many Finns of the security guarantees the EU provides, and Soini, following public opinion, supported the sanctions implemented on individual Russian and Ukrainian officials and condemned the annexation, although he was sceptical of economic sanctions. In 2012, Finnish favourability towards the EU was increasing, but still critical of the ins and outs of bureaucratic apparatus. Now in 2016, more Finns are in favour of the EU than during the 1994 referendum. Ultimately, the atmosphere in Finland has changed. The run-up to the 2011 election was beset by political scandal, EU crisis and resentment over Finland having to bail out member states. Now the crisis has subsided, the scandals in the past, and the need for populism subdued. Soini has responded in kind with attempts to make the party more than just a protest vote. This change became finalised in 2014 when Soini withdrew the party from UKIP's group in the European Parliament and instead joined the British Conservative Party in the group of European Conservatives and Reformists. By 2015, this strategy had worked and the Finns party became part of the government, although losing a little bit of their vote share. This was largely on the back of the growing economic issues facing the country, welfare cuts, unemployment, pensions, etc., and less so on issues of migration and EU reform. Indeed, only 3% of Finns in December of 2014 saw immigration as the most important issue facing the country, according to Eurobarometer data. In September 2015, 30,000 Finns amassed in Helsinki to protest proposed austerity measures, the largest public protest since 1991. Immigration policy of the government barely changed, creating malcontent within the party, particularly among the nationalist faction. By 2016, Finn's party support polled at about 8%, the lowest since their electoral breakthrough in 2011. Ultimately, the party has a problem with its image and direction. Is it a right-wing populist party? Is it a left-wing party for agrarian voters? Is it a single-issue anti-immigration party? There is not a very cogent vision here, and this has been thrown into sharp relief. In December 2016, Jussi Halla-aho stated his intention to run for leadership of the party in June 2017. If halla-aho wins next year, we can expect a very different party emerging under his direction. The Finns party are a good example of the crisis of government. Populists, basically by definition, exist in opposition. They need an elite to rail against. They need to speak to and for the ordinary citizen. As soon as that task becomes untenable, so too does populist support. The Finns party, now literally embedded in the mechanisms of Finnish consensus politics, are unable to be that voice, and are having their support severely curtailed as a result. The very centre party, so thoroughly embroiled in scandal in 2007, so vocally criticised by the Finns party in the past, are now the most popular party in the country as former Finns party voters revert back to the centre in droves. A leadership bid later this year could reinvigorate party support. In the 2014 European elections, Jussi Halla-aho was the party's most popular candidate. Whether that translates to intra-party support, well, we'll see come June. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy my content, please do consider donating via Patreon or Bitcoin. Links are in the descriptions. Transcripts to my videos along with citations and bibliographies are available to patrons. A massive thank you to those of you already donating. It makes a monumental difference and I really do appreciate it. If donating isn't possible for you, that is no problem at all. Please do like this video if you enjoyed it, and if you haven't already, click subscribe. I really value your support. If you didn't, hit dislike and give me some criticism. Constructive criticism is very helpful and will be duly noted. Thanks a lot, and until next time.